Oh, okay.
So it records my voice?
It'll record the voice and the screen we're sharing.
Oh, okay. I'm going to restart this if I can so people can see its swarm collection.
Okay. You should be able to use.
Let's see what happens.
Oh, we gotta. There we go. We're at the beginning.
You're so smart. Except I paused it in all my excitement. All right, so there we go. All right, so splits. Obviously, this is a hive that chose to split itself. So if you want to be doing stuff like this, that's always an option, AKA catching swarms from your own yard. But obviously, the goal would be to manage that to where you're not having to climb up trees, because this was a lucky one. All we had to do was pull the truck back behind and get the bees off that branch. Most of the time you're not that lucky, and they either completely leave and you don't have a clue where they are, or they go somewhere where it's difficult to get them. So yeah, so we're gonna talk about how you can try to minimize your losses due to swarming, and really that's where splits come in. So obviously you have motivators for splitting beyond that, beyond just losing them to a swarm. Maybe you want to increase your apiary or whatever. But I think it's important to understand first that they're going to do it regardless. So colony fission is the fancy term for it. I say this because if you ever take the master beekeeping test, you'll need to know that. But it's also a swarm split. You know, people will even call swarm split sometimes. So it's essentially the hive, the full hive, which is a superorganism, right, is reproducing at a superorganism level, right? Whereas reproducing at an individual level would be the queen laying eggs inside the hive, right? So this is the full superorganism reproducing. And when they do that, you have this original queen leaving the colony with anywhere from 40 to 60%, we usually say half the hive. So half the hive's population will go with her, leaving whatever resources, hopefully queen cells and things behind, and then the other half of the bees stay. When they do that, they're going to start a whole new colony from scratch, right? Cool. So there's lots of reasons why they might do that, why they might swarm in the first place. Either they're too cramped. There's obviously what we talked about. There's that natural urge to spread the genetics and reproduce at a colony level. And then they're also getting indicators from just the environment around them. So spring's happening, the days are getting longer, the temperatures are warming up, flowers are starting to bloom. All of that to a bee it's just genetically encoded into them that it's time, right? So those indicators are going to have them thinking in that direction, even with a lot of these preventative measures that we take to try to keep them from swarming on their own. So it's important to realize that, because that might dictate how we do splits in the first place, because we're trying to think, okay, how do we mimic this behavior so that they don't do it again, right? So obviously we have 3 different sizes of bee yards right here. They're all mine, but we'll just pretend for the sake of this video that they're not. You know, whether you're looking to have just the one, it's not in this picture. It's not in the picture. The flow hive's in a different yard. These are old pictures. So we have the top bar, kind of one hive in the backyard, kind of thing, up to a true commercial loading yard. So depending on what you're trying to do, and I think Chris already talked about this a little bit, about what your motivator is. Are you trying to produce the most amount of honey? Or are you trying to produce the most amount of bees? Typically, those are mutually exclusive. You can only do one or the other. It's difficult to do both at the same time to the fullest, right? You can obviously do both at the same time, but not with the same hive, okay? So if I have 100 bee boxes and I want to do honey with half and bees with half, that could work. But with one hive, you've got to kind of pick one or the other. Make sense? I keep forgetting I have a clicker in my hand. This is fancy. So basically, when we're doing this, we do like to start with what our goals are. Are you wanting to grow? Are you wanting to maintain the size of your apiary? And this comes down to the why, like why are you doing it in the first place? Are you trying to get a certain number for ag valuation? Are you trying to get, are you trying to produce a second income or a full income with your bees? Or are you just doing it because you like bees? So anyway, think about that and decide kind of how big you want to be. We talk about a 1.5 rule. So if you want to have 5 hives, we would say you probably need to be shooting for like 7 or 8, because we take that number and multiply it by 1.5 to figure out kind of the ideal place to keep your bees, especially in the spring or summer, because you will have either losses or you'll have times in the winter months where you might combine hives back together, and or fall really, you're probably not doing a whole lot of management in true winter. But if you're recombining hives, then having that 1.5 helps you to still stay at that target goal that you're looking for. All right, so I keep clicking things. So we've got splits is how we're gonna increase our hive count. Obviously, you've got to make sure you have enough equipment. So if you are considering splitting and you do not already have bee boxes made, you probably should be working on that immediately because it's pretty much time. So just realizing that it's not just the act of going outside and getting the bees and splitting them. You need to make sure that you've already prepared all of your equipment and really, again, prepared for the worst case scenario, right? So it's better to have some extra equipment around than not have enough. And then make sure that if you're going to be going through these splits and you're going to be increasing your hive count, that you're ready to take on that extra responsibility and labor. And then realizing that growth is seasonal. You're not going to be splitting your hives truly at your convenience, right? You have to take into account the weather, the timing, and everything else. So you want to give your bees the best chance by splitting them in the spring versus splitting them, right before winter. So, which is perfect, which is why we're talking about this today. So I'm not really sure. Oh, that's fancy. So we want to be ahead of our bees as a beekeeper. As a beekeeper, part of the lesson for us, and I mean, obviously we can't manage everything, right? These are kind of like children. To a certain extent, they're going to do what they want, but you can provide them with the structure. You can provide them with the resources. You can do a lot of these things to kind of keep them doing what you want them to do instead of whatever they want to do. So that's how we personally define beekeepers versus beehavers. And then realizing that anything that you do today has a 30 to 90 day turnaround. You don't see the true efforts of that and the effects of that right away. Bees take a little bit of time. So that's good news, because same thing goes for if something's broken in your hive, right? You want to go in there, you want to fix it immediately because the queen's not looking right or whatever. You got to be patient with them and realize that anything that happens is not going to have an immediate solution. So the more prepared you are, keeping your bees 30 to 90 days ahead, the better off you're going to be, which is why I've now talked about splits for like 2 months. This is my 3rd month to be talking about splits and preparing people for what that looks like in their apiary. So if you don't have boxes built, honestly, and you've been to my class, like at this point, if I could give you a grade, it wouldn't be a good one.
As a youth program director, it would be a good grade right now either.
No kidding. So, all right. So knowing what you're looking at is obviously the key step. If you're about to go into your hive and do a split, you need to know exactly what it is that you've got in your box. So you've got honey there on the outside, that kind of flat, waxy looking covered honey. It can also look a little lighter than that if there's bubbles underneath it. So this would be called a wet capping. So it's kind of, it kind of looks, I don't know, greasier almost. And then if it's a dry capping, it means there's an air pocket underneath. So you'll see it'll look slightly more like brood, but typically a lot lighter. Pollen is the super yellow stuff that beginner beekeepers often think is honey, just because it's yellow. And then you've got this open brood which is all of these cells that are not capped. And you can see in a lot of them the larvae, and some of the ones where you can't see exactly what's in them, those are probably eggs or very small 1 or 2 day old larvae. So anyway, there's probably stuff in most of those cells. And then we have the capped brood, the sealed brood over here. This one says and varroa. They're basing that off of how there's some perforated caps where a bee has probably looked in, seen varroa, and they might be pulling that varroa or pulling that brood out. But that's a side note. We have these arrows pointing towards the nurse bees because those are some of the most important bees for what we're about to do, which is splits. You want as many nurse bees as you can get because they're going to take care of your new bees and your new queens. So anyway, nurse bees, you can tell where they are usually because they're going to be hanging out on those frames where there's open brood, not the capped brood as much. And so that's where we want to be looking for these bees. And while they may not be just completely covering the brood, because if it's warm or humid outside, they don't want to overheat that brood. So they may be hanging out kind of around the brood nest instead of directly on it. So anyway, there we go. All right. So this is kind of a tricky slide because it's not totally designed to freak you out, but it is designed to make you think. Not all of these are signs that your bees may swarm. And so I want to talk about what you're seeing in your hive. Now, I am a believer that the more of this like brood comb, or the more of this, burr comb, thank you. What the heck am I saying? The more of this burr comb that you've got, you may end up, the bees may feel a little more crowded or whatever. And so it could be an indicator that they're producing so much wax that they're able to coat lots of things that don't really need to be coated. And so you want to watch hives that are just producing a ton of burr comb because that might be a very, very early indicator that they're getting crowded. But then you've got this little queen cup down in the bottom right-hand corner, and that isn't really super alarming by itself. You want to look inside, see if it's got royal jelly in it, see if it's already got a larva in it, see if it's just something that they're building and practicing. Now, on the other hand, the top right corner is very obviously a situation where they've completely built out those queen cells. And so this hive in that picture is most definitely going to swarm if it hasn't already. So yeah. So anyway, that's kind of the elevation of how things work. Now, they'll build out these little queen cups even if they're not planning on swarming. But it can be, again, just like all these other things, it can be an early indicator to watch, right? If I see them building a bunch of queen cups, I'm going to be watching for that each time I go into the hive. And so I'm not just going to take it for granted. I am going to look inside and see, is there royal jelly, is there larva? And at that point, when I see royal jelly and larva, that's my real, okay, so in a couple weeks, we could be dealing with the swarm. How do I want to handle that? Cool. All right, so as we talked about, you want to be prepared. You want to be 30, 90 days ahead. So you want to have a plan A and a plan B. And I say that because a lot of you are ordering queens and not necessarily just going to wait until your bees are ready to swarm. You want them to swarm on or you want to have them split on your timeline. So your plan A would obviously be, I'm going to get these queens in, I'm going to make a split, I'm going to split them, they're going to love that queen, and it's going to be fantastic, right? That's how it's supposed to go. Plan B, and maybe even plan C and D, is what happens if it doesn't go exactly like that? What happens if they want to swarm before you get your queen? What happens if they don't take your queen well when you put her in? All of those things are what we're going to talk about a little bit. Yeah.
This year, because it's been so warm this winter, and looking at the calendar of when the queens for our kids are supposed to come in,
Mm-hmm.
we are almost certainly going to be doing Plan B or C.
Yeah, So
They're
having
going to want to swarm before your queens are ready.
yeah, they're building up. So you want to make sure you're doing everything you can to do some swarm prevention until you're ready to actually split them. So we will talk a little bit about that. But generally, if I haven't said it enough times, you need to have something to split them into, whether it's another box or a nuke box like in this picture. I love doing splits with nuke boxes, but it's not always feasible for people. So if you've got one and you want to split into that and then bump them up to a bigger hive, that's awesome. If you don't, then we'll just split with a little stronger split and put them into that single hive box. When?
Are you putting the nuke into like the bees are in the nuke box, into a regular box? Would you just like take the frames out and get them off of it?
I would, what I would do is if I already had a single box ready with 10 frames in it, I would remove 6 frames. I'd put my 5 in, and then I'd put that last 6 empty frame in with it too. And so, yeah, I wouldn't even worry about shaking or anything. I mean, I would probably shake out whatever's left in the box once I get all those frames in. But if you're making your split into the nuke in the first place, the nice thing about doing that is you're letting them build up in a little bit more incremental steps, right? You might see a little higher success rate with splitting into a nuke where they're nice and cozy and tighter, versus going straight into a big box. Anyway, so queen replacement plan. This means a lot of things. It means your initial, like, what am I going to put in there? Am I going to put a queen? Am I going to let them make their own? What happens if the queen doesn't work out? All those things, right? So I would have, again, a plan A and a plan B for that. If you get into your hive today and there's 11 queen cells, I don't know that you're going to have much luck in convincing them not to swarm. So you're probably going to need to just make that split that way. And maybe you let them hatch one of those out and see what happens. Or maybe you call and try to get something faster from a commercial queen breeder. But those are both options.
My general advice specifically for the kids in
Uh-huh.
our group
Mhm.
is if you have queen cells right now, go ahead and split. Take your queen and put her in a nuke box or another box somewhere. Let them raise that queen with queen cells.
Mhm.
And then when your queens are ready that we already have ordered for you, now you can decide whether you want to keep the queen they raised, and she might be just fine.
Or replace
you
her.
have something to do. You have a queen you can do other things with. Or you can pinch that new queen if you think maybe she's not mated very well or whatever, and then use your new queen in that box.
Yep. No, that's perfect.
That's my general advice for the kids specifically.
Because they already have a queen coming. And if you don't,
but it's not going to be here until mid-April.
yeah, and that is a real possibility for anybody. So having that planned out in your head. I give this particular class kind of to all ages, and so it's not. I do want you to think outside of your particular situation, but obviously make a plan for your particular situation. So this is a very standard split, right? A 3 to 5 frame split is a pretty standard split with a minimum of 2 brood and a food frame. And
that's in the new box.
In the new box.
What are you leaving behind?
Oh, well, I'll get there. Everything else, in theory, but maybe not. I might make 2 or 3 of these personally, but we're not going to talk about that. So depending on the strength of your hive, and Chris did a good job of putting a document together where it basically said if you have fewer than 6 frames of brood, just probably not a good plan to split from that box. Especially as a newer beekeeper, you don't want to debilitate a really great hive just because you get a little antsy. You want to make sure you leave healthy hives behind and then create new healthy hives. If you strip it down to nothing, strip it down to parts, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of not so great hives, which is not our goal. So what I leave behind is probably, it's going to change a little bit based on that. But I mean, obviously I don't want my split to be stronger than what I leave behind is my general rule of thumb. Okay. So I'm not going to I'm not going to strip it down. I'm not going to strip that hive down for parts. So minimum of 2 brood, minimum of 1 food. And ideally on the brood frames, I like closed, even though we talked about in that initial picture, I want the open brood frame bees to be in my new box, but I want closed brood in my new box as well. And the reason, can you guess why? They're going to hatch out, and then they're going to be super happy in their new house because they don't know any different, right? They're not going to know that super strong, awesome hive they just left behind. Whereas if it's the older bees, they might be like, wait a minute, that was a Cadillac of a hive over here. Why are you putting me in this thing? So there is that temptation for them to go back to their original hive. And so by putting as many closed brood frames as I can into the new box, I'm strengthening that hive. You know, maybe it isn't super strong today, but within a few days or within the week, they're gonna look great because those bees are gonna hatch out. Right. And they're not gonna have allegiance to a previous queen. They're gonna be born and think, cool, this is my queen. She's awesome. All right, so when we say shake nurse bees into that new split, what I'm doing there again is finding more of those open broods, and I'm putting the live adult bees from those frames into the new box. When you shake it, you kind of like real firmly, just one, you're not like shaking it like this, like just one quick movement, those bees will just fall right into the hive. And the ones that fall and just kind of stay are typically nurse bees. They're not real flighty. If you do that and they immediately fly off around the whole hive, they're probably going to go back to the original hive. So you want to be watching how many bees are kind of sticking to that box when you shake in new bees. And you want to make your new split as strong as possible with those bees that will stay, adult bees that will stay. All right, so we have the plan now for how we're going to get the brood into the box, how we're going to get the nurse bees into the box, and then, you know, now we have to talk about the queen, and that's going to be your whole thing. So assuming we did this on purpose, we went in, we grabbed the frames that we wanted. Are we going to put the new queen in this box? Or are we going to put the old queen in this box?
Yes, depending on what you want to do.
Yeah, so in an ideal world, you would put the old queen in this box. And why? Because we're trying to mimic that actual swarm, right? In an ideal world, we want the old queen to have left, go into a new hive box, and now the whole colony is thinking, oh, cool, we just swarmed. That was easy, right? That's ideal. Now, the reality is sometimes you can't find that queen. The reality is sometimes you just, you know, whatever the case may be, you aren't able to put the old queen into that box, or maybe you want to replace the queen in the first place. You're going to introduce a new queen. So all of that will come into play, but perfect textbook split would be take your old queen, put her in the new box. There are some queen finding tricks that we can talk about, including like queen excluders and going through the hive frame by frame, all that kind of stuff.
We have a whole other class.
Yeah, so I'm not going to go into all of that, but stay tuned, YouTube watchers. Just kidding. All right. So we talked about fitting the box to the colony a little bit, but I'll talk about it specifically in this case. That 3 to 5 frame split, I'm going to have a smaller amount of frames required if I'm putting them in a 5 frame nuke box than I would if I was putting them in a 10 or 8 frame deep box, right? So keeping that in mind. You want to give them room to grow, but you don't need, but you don't want to put just a frame or two in a big box if you have the option. Cool. Walkaway splits. We don't recommend this, but I am going to talk just a little bit about it. We don't recommend this for brand new beekeepers really in general, because you're not knowing, if you don't know exactly what you're looking at, then it's hard for you to assess what you just did after it happens. But if you don't have access to any queens and a hive is literally about to split itself, then essentially what a walkaway split is you creating the split, letting them make their own queens, do all of that kind of stuff. The reason why that's not ideal is anytime you have the queen, anytime you have an unmated queen or even just a queen cell, she's got to emerge, right? She's got to be healthy. She's got to emerge. She's got to leave. She'll leave probably about 3 days after she emerges, go on this mating flight, come back, maybe do it again. She's got to go meet up with 10, 15 drones. So hopefully there are drones available to her. So seasonality becomes an issue. She's got to come back safely, not get eaten by birds or wasps or whatever else might be out there to get her. And then she's got to start laying well. Okay.
She's got to come back to the right hive.
Yeah, she's got to come back to the right hive, and then she's got to start laying well. So there's just more uncertainty than getting a commercially bought mated queen. And so while a lot of us do this with regularity, I mean, in a perfect world for you guys as beginners, you would avoid that uncertainty because you don't have as many hives to play with, right? Which is why I say if you have lots of extra hives to play with, this is actually really fun to do and watch them go through this process and make their own queens. And it's really rewarding to come back and her be laying awesome. And this is like entirely made in your yard. That's really cool. It's also not a great option for everybody in Texas, because if they have a really nasty feral bee population, it might not be ideal to let your hive go out and mate with whatever's out there in the wild. So make your judgments based on those sorts of things. Daleen, it's so fun to see you over there, even though you're like 10 feet away. All right, so tools, tricks, tips. We like to have all of these extra little things around or be prepared to do all of these things. So queen excluder, as I kind of hinted at, it might be helpful if you're trying to find your queen to use a queen excluder. Again, we can talk about that separately. A queen clip is also great because if you want to move her from your old hive into your new hive, you can use the little clip, catch her on the frame, gently walk her over and release her versus trying to grab her and potentially damaging her. Just do that really calmly. If you've never used a queen clip before, maybe practice on a few drones before you go after your queen.
Can I get some advice on that?
Yeah.
I am a big fan of the plastic ones because they are a little fragile. You break them occasionally, but the metal queen clips that they sell, I cut queens in half with them.
Yeah, not ideal.
And it made me cry.
Yeah. So the plastic ones, the only downside to any, yeah, that'd be great. The only downside to any queen clip really is that you do need to be careful once you catch her to make sure that it stays shut. Because if you have queen clips, some of them are a tighter wound than others, and you don't want to lose her on your way from one hive to the other because the clip was a little too loose. You know what I mean? She brought her bee suit too.
Okay.
All right.
This is class.
This little trick is Justin's. So I'm gonna skim over this isolating a nuke for a day. If you're trying to encourage queen acceptance or whatever, what he has done in the past is make that nuke up, keep it inside for the night, and then introducing queens the next day. So you don't want to do that outside very frequently, because when you affect their ability to control the temperature by closing them into the hive. You could cause them to overheat and die, which is not cool. Feeding is a really awesome tip or trick, especially in the case requirement, especially in the case if you're truly letting them create their own queen. You want to make sure that they've got feed, because that's how they're going to produce that royal jelly and give her everything that they need. But even in the case of jump starting the new hive, you want that queen to come in, have plenty of resources, be able to lay, build out the population of the new hive. So feeding is a way to increase the success rate of your hives in general. So, all right, and then, like we've said a million times, this is not the gospel of beekeeping. This is just one or two ways to do it. And if you are super interested in growing your hives a lot, then this Larry Connor book called Increase Essential is an awesome, it's pretty short as far as, like, it's not a very thick book, but it's got a lot of information, and the print is kind of small. So, all right, so digging into the queen options just a little bit more, we've got queen cells here. Obviously, if you bought queen cells, that queen will not be mated, so you can't put her into a hive and put a queen excluder on to keep her in, right? She needs to be able to get out and go mate and come back. The turnaround time on putting that into your hive and having a laying producing queen is going to be closer to that 2 to 3 week mark versus right away. So keeping that in mind, if you've already got a dwindling hive, this is not a great solution. Obviously, you've got the caged queen up there. She is ready to go. So if you're looking for the biggest bang for your buck, immediate production, that's an awesome way to go. And then we've got a virgin queen, which this one's injured. She's not going to make it, but I put her in here anyway. They are available, but again, you've got a longer turnaround time to her actually getting laid and a little higher risk. Yes. Each one, gosh, I don't even know if I know the market values for this year yet. But for the queen.
Well, $3 to $4.
Oh, $3 to $4. Oh, I usually see sales in like the $10 to $15 range.
Really?
Yeah. But yeah. But that's okay. I mean, depending on it, and it also may depend on how many you get, because a lot of times if you're going to buy 2 full bars, which would be like this times 6 or 7, yeah. So anyway, but then a commercially available mated queen, probably in the $25, $35 range, depending on who you get it from. Maybe even $40 this year, which is nuts. And then virgin queens we really don't see around here, so I'm not even going to go down that path. But if you're introducing a new queen, there's a couple little tricks and tips here. I love these hairpin rollers, which is the picture to the left. What's nice about those is she has that solid plastic bottom where she's safe, she can't be stung. So if you're dealing with this is kind of a side note on splits, but if you're dealing with a queen or a hive acceptance problem, like a super aggressive hive that doesn't want a new queen, these are pretty cool because they can actually get away from the bees, and it's still vented. Then you've got the, you just push that queen cage into the wax or balance it in between 2 frames. You never want to put where she's supposed to get out. You want to make sure that gravity works for you. So what can happen, let's say, I say this because this is important and I've seen you do this wrong. So you're going to introduce this cage, right? You're going to put it into this new hive. You're going to remove the little cork and reveal candy. And that candy will get eaten through by the bees that are in the hive to release the queen. That's how the queen cage works, right? So if you put this in there and you set it vertically and the queen cage candy is down at the bottom, what can happen is if any of those bees die, inside that cage, it can block her ability to get out. So I've seen that happen. So I just try to keep it sideways so that it's real easy for them to like move things if they need
So
to.
you put it flat like this.
Yep.
That's exactly what I
Yeah,
do.
I put it
You're the only other person
horizontally.
that does that.
Yeah, people don't think it through, or they haven't done it enough to know that there can be problems. All right, so we kind of have touched on this, but you've got the queen life cycle. I put this in here just so you can think about it. I work in ranges because the reality is that as much as we want to think bees work exactly to the time frame, when she goes out on her mating flight and when she emerges is slightly variable. So I've got some of those ranges in here. Okay. So again, if you're mating your own queen, or you're putting a queen cell in, or you're allowing that queen cell to be built, you want to make sure you give her ample time. If there's even a little bit of a hiccup on the weather, it may not happen as quickly. So I don't usually panic that nothing's happening until day 28, right? Or well, more like 3 weeks into the process. And panic is a really exaggerated word. I usually don't panic at all when it comes to this kind of stuff. It's either going to work out or it's not. We combine with the other hives and it's all okay. So just keep cool and calm and it'll be fine. All right. So now that we've talked about splitting, if we're trying to stretch our timeline and have our bees wait until we have a queen commercially available, here are a couple of things we can do. If you get in there and there's a couple little swarm cells, realistically, you could possibly break them down once. You're not going to be able to do that just every time you go in there. Like, that's not a good practice. Doesn't make sense. But if you have a queen coming in 3 days, it might stop, it might stop them temporarily so that they've got to start over, and you can put your queen in when she gets there. So it's really just an extender. It's not a solution.
I think a lot of it depends on how far in advance
Yeah.
your queen's coming. If it's 3 or 4 days, that's great.
Yeah.
If it's 3 or
3
4
weeks. Yeah.
you probably need to think of something that helps.
Yeah. You can also preventatively, rather than, if you've got multiple hives, if you have the ability to kind of shift resources around, you can try equalizing hives out to keep them a little more stretched thin. You can expand your brood nest just a little bit to give them more space and kind of extend the time where they have that urge to swarm. So there's lots of little things you can do to get from now until 4 weeks from now or 6 weeks from now, but none of it is a guarantee. So there you go. Questions?
One of the things I do, and I want your opinion on this,
Yep.
and maybe I should ask Justin on his opinion too.
Probably.
If you've got a hive that is on the verge of swarming, you see swarm cells, queen cells, and your queens are not going to be ready for 3 or 4 weeks, and it goes back to your choices. If you don't want to split, if you don't want to make more hives, one of the things that I have done, and I've told people to do, is to go ahead and split your hive, take your queen, and just like you would any other normal newt split.
Mm-hmm.
Split them, put them off somewhere, go into the hive that's left behind and cut out all the queen cells.
Yeah.
Then in about a week to 10 days, go back in and cut out the queen cells again, because there'll be new ones again. And then combine that split hive back to your original hive,
Yeah.
What we call a newspaper combine.
Yeah. So we would never do that.
But y'all are interested in splitting your hives. You want more hives.
Well, not even just that, but it's pretty cumbersome. So like, depending on, you'd have to be, in my opinion, you'd have to be really motivated to stay the same size to go through all of that. From my perspective, you'd almost be better off, because this is gonna be a cycle. You'd almost be better off just sucking it up and splitting, and then finding a friend that wants some extra bees. You know, like to me, that's easier. It's friendly. You know, like
Or
you,
sell them.
yeah. And then if
Pocket
something
cash.
happens, yeah, if something happens to your bees in the future, you can call that friend and say, hey, I need your help. So from my perspective, that would be a lot. It's a cumbersome, it's a lot of effort to go through to keep your apiary the same size. And I, from an efficiency standpoint, would be like, it's a lot, but you totally do all that.
I think a lot of
I
it
like
might
this
also
video,
be
so I'm
with
just playing it so that
if they're going,
smoker
if they really want a big, strong hive to make honey, and they don't want to cut the number of bees down, that might be another reason to do it.
you could also just split it and then do the fancy, like have 2 hives work in the same honey super situation.
I was in the tell the kids about
Just saying,
that.
there's other options.
The only other thing that I've had on
Yeah,
my class
yeah.
that I do is, and I bring this up because some of the kids are this case, that they are almost all using mediums.
Mhm.
Um,
How does that translate?
Some of them have hives that are 3 or 4 mediums deep.
Right.
If one option that they have, rather than splitting into nukes,
Mhm.
is just to take your 4 boxes and make 2
2.
hives of 2 boxes.
Mhm.
And if you do that, you don't really have to care when you're splitting. You don't have to care which one the queen is in, because as long as you divide your resources equally, the queen will be in one, the other one will start making queen cells, and you can either let them make that queen, or when you get your queen in,
Yeah,
put
and
your
that's
queen in that one.
basically a walkaway split. So, I mean, you could totally do that. I think my only hesitation with it is that you really need to know what you're looking at, because you do have to be able to confidently go back in and say, my queen is here, my queen is not here, which is fine, and it's totally doable.
Right.
So,
But I mean, if you wait 10 days,
Yeah.
it's going to, the hive that doesn't have eggs and larvae
Yeah.
is going to be the one without the queen.
yeah, assuming you can see all that, that's literally my only concern. Yeah.
Kind of hammered that in.
Okay, cool.
So I told you. I know that there's a couple of kids that are in that situation right now.
Okay.
The timing on that is kind of what you want to pay attention to. As long as they're not about to storm, if your queens are coming
can
in
wait.
on April 11th, then you're going to do that split on April 1st, give or take.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.